Hello, chess fans, and welcome to a very special Saturday afternoon broadcast here at the beautiful St. Louis Chess Club. Today, we're going to be talking about computer chess. You know, for the past 20 years, computers have outplayed humans, and we're past that. And we're discussing something much deeper and fun today. Hello, my name is Ben Simon, and I'm joined alongside two very special guests, Grandmaster Dénes Boros, and of course, the computer chess expert you may not be familiar with, Jacob Wilkins. Jacob actually used to work at the club too. So we're all pretty close with each other, and we're here to talk about something that you guys feel passionately about, AlphaZero and computer chess in general. But for those not in the know so far, I have to ask, Jacob, what is AlphaZero? Why is it so different from other computer chess programs?
So AlphaZero is something that was released by DeepMind. They released some results early in the early results in December 2017.
And DeepMind is Google.
DeepMind is a child company of Alphabet, Google's parent company. So it's sort of their sibling companies. And they released a sort of a preview of a paper that they were going to publish in a peer-reviewed journal, and they showed that they had used brand new techniques to beat Stockfish, which was sort of head and shoulders the best chess engine at the time.
Okay, and what about this technique? I mean, we know that chess engines, they go over all these different moves and they have opening books. What makes AlphaZero specifically different from, say, Houdini or Stockfish?
So Stockfish, Houdini, all of these traditional engines, at a very fundamental level, what they're doing is they have a very simple and fast evaluation. So like when they determine how good a position is, that's very simple, but very fast and intentionally so. And then they just try to push their analysis as deep as possible in the important lines, and they try to find the absolute best position that they can force. So they don't, for example, look at how hard the line is or how easy it is for their opponent. There's what is the best position I can force. And they've come up with a lot of clever tricks to do this more effectively, but ultimately that's what they're doing, trying to look as deeply as possible and figure out what is the best position I can force.
Boros, you actually did a 1-hour lecture here at the St. Louis Chess Club not too long ago about how you didn't think that AlphaZero was the best thing since sliced bread. Why is that? Why are you a skeptic?
Well, I've seen the first preview, of which was pretty astounding. 27 wins for AlphaZero and 72 draws with 0 losses. But there were many...
Against Stockfish,
Against
right?
Stockfish, yes.
One
in
of the strongest in the
2017,
world.
yes. One of the strongest. But there are many questions, open questions, that were not answered at the time. And actually, we're here to talk about that with Jacob. As Nakamura also mentioned, there were things like Stockfish needed opening books, but he didn't have one. And he attributed this big loss to that. And I also felt that there were some conditions that I feel was not fair enough. But I mean, it's also a good question if fairness is so important to this match. That's kind of the question.
Pardon me for jumping in so deeply, so quickly.
Yeah.
I mean, we only have an hour, but if AlphaZero is playing against Stockfish in this big match and doesn't lose a game, how do you begin to dispute its superiority over Stockfish?
Well, the thing is that I'm looking at is how did the opponent fight? So how did Stockfish actually amount against AlphaZero's game? Now, for example, I saw a Pologaevsky line went in the Queen's Indian, that's well known, where Stockfish lost to AlphaZero's very nice attacking game in d5, where Stockfish didn't know the exact way to defend. Now, in that case, the lack of opening book, I think, was crucial. So in this sense, I'm a bit of a skeptic.
Now, so you think Stockfish was handicapped without the opening book, basically?
Yes, I think so, yeah.
Now, the opening book, for those of you who don't know, I mean, look, chess theory, the openings are so widely developed and so well known. What Boros is saying is without an opening book, Stockfish has to start thinking on move 1, which is basically, it's not what chess engines typically do. Does AlphaZero use an opening book, Jacob?
No, so in all of these matches, AlphaZero also did not have an opening book. The sort of the counterpoint that a lot of people like to say is because of how it's trained, which we'll likely talk about in short order, it sort of effectively learns the opening anyway. So a lot of the initial skepticism about these results that were published in the 2017 sort of preprint, that was one of the big weaknesses in the configuration, people thought, is that AlphaZero has sort of implicitly learned an opening book while Stockfish just didn't have one.
Hey, nowadays we can download Stockfish, we can get ChessBase, we can put Houdini on that. How can I play on my computer with AlphaZero?
So you can't. That's the easy and depressing answer.
I'm so surprised.
Yeah, strangely, DeepMind has not released this. The nice thing, though, is that since early 2018, there's been an open source community-driven project, Leela Chess, that has been basically trying to reproduce the AlphaZero results, and they've had astounding success. For those of you who don't know, there's a sort of a high-profile engine competition called TCEC. It's on very high-end hardware, and it gets a lot of notoriety among the computer chess community and broader chess community. And actually, in about 2 or 3 weeks, they're going to be having the super final for this season between the two strongest engines in this season, and that's actually going to be Stockfish and Leela Chess.
Well, spectacular. I mean, but we can't say that Leela Chess is 100% the same as AlphaZero, right?
Yes. AlphaZero's full specifications, like the exact code that they wrote, the exact training parameters, none of this was revealed in full detail. So the Leela Chess team has been sort of going off the bits that have been revealed and trying to get as close as possible.
Boros, I remember whenever AlphaZero those games were first released. You go to chessgames.com, you go wherever and see the games that were released. And if I recall, it was only AlphaZero's wins that were released. Have the draws made it to see the light of day yet?
I think so, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so to add to that, so most of what we've talked about here so far were the results that were reported in the preview paper, or sort of the preprint in 2017. The full peer-reviewed paper has since been released. That was in December 2018. And in that, they released 210 games total, a lot of draws, and all of the losses in the particular matches that they released. So we've now seen sort of the good, the bad, and the ugly from AlphaZero, and we'll actually get to that.
A little bit of the history here that's kind of crazy. You know, Google is not just a search engine anymore. I'm sure if you've been reading the headlines, you know. The Alpha name started with AlphaGo, right? I mean, it's trying to be the best Go playing entity. You got the 19 by 19 board, and it's incredibly difficult for engines to be good at, I understand. And, well, AlphaGo mastered that. And then they go to AlphaZero, which is speculated to be the strongest chess playing entity in the universe. And I just saw a few days ago that DeepMind is making its way into StarCraft. And
Yes.
that was interesting because StarCraft is not a turn-based game, and it was beating pro players. Where is DeepMind going with all of this? What is next? I mean, man, it really gets you thinking.
Yeah, they're clearly sort of trying to push the limits of this reinforcement learning from scratch to conquer different domains. It's not exactly the same approach, but yeah, they had a very successul demonstration with StarCraft. Again, a different approach, but they've also been trying their hands at things like protein folding, so sort of more practical scientific endeavors. So they definitely have big plans.
It does seem like, is it here to stay? That was our main question, and we can answer already. No, it's on the roll.
Well, yeah, we can definitely discuss that. By the way, we are 100% live right now on the St. Louis Chess Club YouTube channel and STL Chess Club on Twitch. And I do have your comments open, and we will be discussing your questions. If you have something that would add to the conversation, let us know at St. Louis Chess Club on YouTube and STL Chess Club on Twitch. Okay, guys, so when we talk about AlphaZero and speculate whether it is the greatest chess playing entity of all time, it's really impossible for us to know for sure until the common man gets his hands on AlphaZero. I mean, do you agree?
Yeah. Yes, I do agree. Like, you want to test it out to actually feel what's happening, although there's a lot of information getting out recently. Mostly the Game Changer book by Matthew Sadler. So there's more and more information coming out about the monster itself, but actually training with it is something that you want to do as a grandmaster. But also as a side note, we also heard rumors that Fabiano did some training with Leela Chess, preparing against Carlsen. I don't know if that's confirmed or not, but that's what I heard.
Right, and you got to imagine that a lot of the world's top players, when AlphaZero dropped, were like, "Hey, let me throw you a few mil, Google and DeepMind, and let me get my hands on that." I don't think that happened though.
Yeah, I mean, even Topalov previously tried to get his hand on some computer technology, but after AlphaZero, obviously everyone wanted Alpha.
Right. Jacob, Leela is AlphaZero for the rest of us. Can I add Leela Chess onto my computer at this time?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's available, fairly straightforward to download. Download the neural network which you have a very large choice in. It's a sort of one of the bigger, if you can call it a problem, one of the bigger problems is people are constantly trying to figure out what is the strongest network to use. But it's very straightforward to download the engine, download a network, and run it. There are instructions that are easily available online. So yeah, it's definitely something you can sort of load into ChessBase, do analysis with.
All right. I want to go to the chat room, if that's okay.
Yes.
Do you have something to say?
Oh, no.
Okay. Jesus Swanger says, I have an important question. Who is moving furniture in the background? We are underneath the Kingside Diner, and they are closing up shop, so you're going to be hearing that all hour, and let's have fun with it. Next question from Jonas. Would giving Stockfish an opening book in a match with AlphaZero get Stockfish only more draws, or would it earn Stockfish some wins?
That's a good question. I think Jacob has an answer for that.
Yeah, so one of the nice things about the AlphaZero story is that, as Dennis mentioned earlier, when they released this preview paper in 2017, there were a lot of conditions that people were a little uneasy about, to put it mildly, like the lack of an opening book, the time control was very bizarre for computer chess. It didn't allow Stockfish to use its sophisticated time management. The memory was configured strangely. In the full paper, which was released in December 2018, they actually included results of a match against Stockfish using a book. The book is called Cerebellum, and it's a book based on deep Stockfish analysis. And to answer the question directly, in that match, you sort of see both. Stockfish's score improved. It didn't really get any more wins with black, but with white it actually started to score some wins. It still lost the match fairly clearly. The performance rating for AlphaZero was something like plus 50 to Stockfish in that match. But it definitely performed better. It managed to pull off some wins with the white pieces, but it wasn't enough to bridge the gap.
Are there any main weaknesses or blind spots in AlphaZero or Leela that we can deduce so far that compared to other chess engines?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's sort of the result of its big strength as well. So the way its search and the neural network work together, it's very much looking for positions where it has a lot of good options. And sort of the practical results it think favor it. And in doing this, it's sort of averaging values over a lot of positions. It's not like traditional engines saying, okay, I have a forced sequence, this one line gives me this evaluation, so that's what I'm going for. It's taking into account, like, well, what if I mess up? What if my opponent messes up? It's averaging in these suboptimal lines. That's great for sort of playing these long-term strategical ideas, which we've seen. It's AlphaZero and Leela are so impressive at. But this sort of averaging, approximate evaluation also makes it susceptible to very precise, very concrete lines, which you see in some very complex tactical positions, and you see them a lot of times in endgames, where you have some sort of counterintuitive, very precise line that you need to play. And there, Leela and AlphaZero both show some fairly clear, if hard to exploit, weaknesses.
Isn't that a lot like poker kind of thinking for computers? Because I know that even in poker, you have percentages of chances of you playing the right cards and winning, or just getting the right cards, and therefore the percentages, the chances of you winning the match changes dramatically. Is that something similar, what Alpha is doing?
The concept is similar. Like, it's taking into account things that might not be optimal. So traditional engines just say assume best play by both sides, what position results. That's all I care about. I don't care what happens if either of us makes some weird mistake. What they're doing is more playing the odds. It's like, okay, like what would I choose if I assume that there's some chance for both me and my opponent to go wrong, which it sort of implicitly does. So in some ways, it's similar. Obviously, it's different in that there's no actual, there are no unknowns in the game of chess. It's all there, unlike poker. But the concept is sort of similar. It's playing the odds.
I mean, I would disagree a little bit that it's all known, because even in chess, sometimes there are situations when you have like 5 equally good options, right? And it's not always clear which one to choose from. Now, when, let's say, Alpha or Leela is pitted against a different computer, what would normally happen in this situation when there's like equal opportunities, like 5 very similar moves, and they have to decide correctly? Which computer would be favored?
So in those sorts of situations, Leela and AlphaZero will typically handle those much better. Because for a traditional engine like Stockfish, Houdini, or Komodo, just to list the sort of the top 3, like they will, if they're all zeros with best play, they're just going to pick one.
All zeros meaning totally drawn,
right?
tied.
It's sort of the dreaded. You plug this into your chess engine, you're like, oh, I think I'm better here, and it's just
and
like,
you
sorry,
shake hands and say goodbye.
0.00 tactics, forced draw. In a lot of positions, traditional chess engines just give 0.00 for several lines. And here, traditional engines tend to just sort of pick one and move. Whereas Leela Chess, AlphaZero, they're better able to say, okay, maybe with best play this is equal, but which ones give me more chances, which one give my opponents more chances to mess up. So they tend to play those in a much better way. And actually, you mentioned this book earlier, it was released yesterday, Matthew Sadler's book on AlphaZero. He actually has an entire chapter talking about this phenomenon where in many of the games, Stockfish is giving 0.00 for several moves several times in a row in a sequence, and that's where it starts to get into trouble, because it's just like, it doesn't matter. Whereas AlphaZero is, well, let me steer this to the harder draw, and it eventually gets too hard even for Stockfish.
Jacob, we have a question from BW1235. He says, how do we determine what size neural network is needed to capture the necessary complexity of chess? Can information theory tell us how much can be stored in a specific configuration of neural net?
So that's an interesting question that doesn't have a clear answer. You can run some numbers and sort of make some assumptions and come up with something, but it really depends on what you mean by capturing the complexity of chess. If you just mean to play at sort of the highest practical level, that's hard to say, but it's going to be a lot smaller than if you mean to play perfect chess. If you mean to get similar results as, say, a 32-piece table base, it's unlikely that a neural net would sort of in anyone's lifetime get to that sort of level. But just to sort of tie this into the way things are, the current strongest nets from Leela are a 20-block, 256 filter network, and that's compressed, that's about 50 megs. So they're already playing world-class level in a neural net that takes up about 50 megs on your disk, which is quite small.
And for those of you who's a lot of that went over your head, I'm there with you. Boros, just to clear this up, you are not against the idea of AlphaZero. You simply feel it is unproven, right?
Yes, I kind of wanted explanations for that first match. I'm interested if it was kind of fair or not. I'm not saying it's necessarily unfair. I just raised points that, okay, Stockfish didn't have, or allegedly didn't have, enough time to make the right move that was needed. Also, I raised the same issue as was mentioned even in the paper, that the opening book was really missing for that match.
Do you feel like it would be more legitimate if Stockfish programmers or representatives were present to negotiate for this match?
Yes, definitely. That would help even more. Yes.
Okay. Well, I understand that you guys have some positions you want to look at that will bring some discussions up for debate. So, Boros, what do you have to show us so far?
So, I want to show two games, actually. So, even in the book, which is called Game Changer, and they say that AlphaZero changed the way we view chess. And to be honest, I'm not sure that's entirely the case, and I'll show you why. So, actually, I'm not going to show this one first, but the other game.
False alarm.
Yes, this one. So, we're going through the Botvinnik Tal game, which is interesting for a different reason. Now, many people say that in the 1960s they didn't know how to play chess. That's false. Namely, Tal will show a chess that will remind you of the brilliancy of AlphaZero.
There's a little mode that's activated that's putting arrows on the screen. Do we know how to get rid of those?
One?
Is it training up here?
Training.
I think that'll do it. There we go.
Cool. 93. I'm fast forwarding to that moment. So we get to this point, and here Tal does something that obviously been done before a million times. People sacrifice, make combinations and such, but this is a world championship match, and that usually changes the dynamic in general. And when Tal played this sacrifice, this was unheard of. How come one sacrifices a piece for nothing? Obviously not nothing. This bishop will open up, and there's lots of pressure on White's position. Now, it's interesting to see that our first thought is, what is this? You're giving a piece away for free. Well, because of this, White is being imbalanced here. And he makes one normal-looking move, takes Rook b1, f3, and he's already in huge trouble. And even though Tal, this knight f4 move might not be the most accurate one, it's still a new chapter of being very practical, and it turns out one of the best decisions in the position. So just like I want to compare this to this computer world, like we have iPads, iPods, but we wouldn't have none of them without von Neumann, who invented the basic computer. So that's why I'm saying that even though Tal's combination might not be perfect, but the concept, what he's doing here, is shown in many of the games these computers play.
I remember during the lecture you were saying AlphaZero is just like Mikhail Tal.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, is there a follow-up to this? I mean, what is your assessment complete?
Yeah, this is my assessment, that I feel that Tal's game is kind of a precursor to these engines of playing these more aggressive play, more practical play, and looking at that as something much stronger.
Jacob, what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, This I think is all quite correct. This way of playing for humans has not been, as you say, like this is nothing new, right? Like
Yeah.
playing for practical chances, looking, saying, okay, maybe these are all sort of objectively leading to the same result with perfect play, but let's make the move that gives my opponent the most problems. This is nothing new for humans. The interesting thing with AlphaZero, Leela, and this sort of approach is that computers are playing sort of this way now, where it's not just, oh, I see that with perfect play this all leads to the same thing, let me just pick some way of playing. It's actually like, okay, let me pose problems for my opponent. Let's make things easier for
We
myself.
can even compare this to the AlphaZero game that was played against Stockfish recently. And this one is this game.
Now, by recently, was this in the original match or is this different?
This is the newest match as far as I know.
Yeah,
yes?
this is one of the games that was released with the December 2018.
The 2018 match.
Paper.
Okay,
Yes.
AlphaZero is black.
Yes. So I'm following your take. So we're playing this regular Dutch defense, which just for the average viewer, one of Kamsky's favorite, who's a multiple US champion. And like Rook B1, this looks like a weird move, but it's actually preparing this idea of B4 and B5. Now that's why black stops it with A5, Queen B3, which actually looks funny. And I feel that there's some opening books involved here, because Rook B1, A5 must be still theory. Knight A6, Rook D1, this looks all normal. H6 already feels like an AlphaZero idea. Bishop E3. I'll actually go up to the critical point. Rook C1. And to be honest, here I'm kind of critical with Stockfish's play. Usually white would strive to do some heavy structural damage to black before it's too late. But in this game, Stockfish kind of plays very slowly with very little plan, or at least I couldn't really decipher what white was doing here. Bishop D7, C5. Okay, now I would get that they want to do some damage to black's position, but then slowly white comes up with this bishop d2, bishop e1 moves, and I'm not quite sure what white is doing, but black, as you can see, has a plan. Already rerouted the knight from a6, a bit iffy there, a6 to d5, and all of the black pieces are coming to life. Queen e8, planning this classical g5, queen h5 plan, e3, g5, and actually that's kind of interesting, because maybe even h4 could be considered if you know what black is already planning to do. But anyways, e3, g5, d2, bishop f3. I'll just fast forward there, and here comes knight g5. And this is something that whenever I first looked at this game, my first thought was, oh, this is Botvinnik Tal all over again.
Yeah, and this is actually very interesting, because if you look at this position with Stockfish, right, it takes it a very long time to realize that knight g5 is even playable, and to sort of give props to the Leela team for sort of faithfully being able to get something in the ballpark of AlphaZero. With Leela Chess, with one of the recent neural networks, it settles on knight g5 as early as like 80 positions evaluated. So by the time it's calculated 80 positions, it's already like, yeah, knight g5 is good, I'm playing this move.
So for the average human being, what does 80 position mean in time?
So for Leela, depending on your hardware, 80 positions, even on like the slowest, is probably going to take you no more than a few seconds.
Oh, wow.
On the very fastest, this is going to be instantaneous. Whereas like Stockfish, even on a decent computer, takes a very long time to even consider that knight g5 is playable.
I have a question on top of a question here from our chat from Christian Philosopher. Any Alekhine's defense games by AlphaZero? I actually wanted to kind of up the ante there. From AlphaZero's play without an opening book, is there anything that we have learned, that the chess community has learned thus far, on existing openings? Anything that's faulty, anything that is better than we once thought, or do we just have it all figured out, or we can't figure it out at all?
So it's a sort of an in-between, and this is a recurring theme. Dennis and I have talked about this in private as well. Sort of a recurring theme with AlphaZero especially is that you get these sort of binary opinions, like either, you know, it was all sort of a marketing ploy and doesn't mean much, or it's, you know, like God descended from on high to play chess with us. The truth, as so often, is somewhere in the middle. A lot of what we see in AlphaZero's play in various openings is stuff that would be familiar to any Grandmaster, right? It's playing at a very high level, but the ideas are not necessarily always, a thunderbolt from on high. Like, there's stuff that a Grandmaster would recognize as being, yes, that's one of the ideas. Now, this is not to say that it's contributed nothing, so again, sort of to continue with this theme, we'll mention the book Game Changer by Sadler, released yesterday. He actually has a section on how AlphaZero handles the opening, and one of these investigations is actually there's a typical structure in chess called a Carlsbad structure, usually arriving from the Queen's Gambit declined exchange variation. And AlphaZero does handle this quite a bit differently than most strong humans do. It basically ignores the idea of a minority attack altogether and plays the position in a very different way. So in many positions, it's sort of just implementing old ideas in sort of a more vigorous way. And other times it actually is contributing some new ideas.
Very well. Boros, were you surprised pleasantly by anything that AlphaZero had to offer in the released games?
Well, it was still kind of a new thing to see a computer play so aggressively and so excitingly. I haven't seen huge novel ideas, but I did appreciate especially this relentless attacking chess that is rarely seen in computers. So actually I'm looking forward to more matches when you actually see the incubating phase, when you see AlphaZero play against AlphaZero, or even Leela Chess against Leela Chess from a combative position. So that's something that I would be very excited to see.
I would be excited to see a stage 0 AlphaZero versus AlphaZero, right?
Yes.
Like, what in the world would you even see if it has no opening book? Supposedly nothing but knowledge of the rules, right?
Yes.
I mean that's got to be fun to watch. That's got to be crazy, right?
Birth of a computer grandmaster.
Yeah, and we do kind of see this with Leela. So with Leela, right, it develops in sort of the same way. It sort of starts from effectively random play, and then it improves. And at each stage, to determine whether this current network is not bugged, it plays a match against the previous one. And the games from these matches are available. Like, you can look at them online, and so you can actually see sort of like how it plays along its development, because it does start from effectively random play. And yeah, some of them are quite humorous.
Someone in our chat earlier asked if AlphaZero could beat Carlsen. I think that any chess engine now, it's pretty much apparent, can beat the strongest human player in 2019. But you have a comparison to Carlsen, I understand, a position. Was that you, or was that you?
It's from the game from Carlsen, the Carlsen Caruana website.
Yes, I have.
Yes.
I mostly have something very interesting about computer thinking. So, in this game, let me go up. This was actually the last game that Fabiano played against Carlsen.
The third rapid, huh?
Yes, the third rapid. And so there's many very strong computers out there. There's AlphaZero, there's Leela Chess, and also there's Sese. So when we were looking at this position at the St. Louis Chess Club, while we were watching the match, Sese showed 3 equally good options. And now I just really want to point this out, how a grandmaster would think and how a computer would think. Now, the says a computer said, you put the rook here, you put the rook here, or, God forbid, you put the rook on f8, I don't really care, it's the same deal. Now, it's very interesting because if you would put the rook on f8 and you would go to any super grandmaster and say, I want to become a chess player, and my suggestion is rook from a8 to f8, I think you're immediately dismissed. Because, and it's not that it's bad, but humans like to think ahead, and rook f8 is just putting a bad piece to a worse place. Now, the computer might think, and could be correct at the same time, that it changes nothing, but as humans, we're very uncomfortable to make a bad piece go even worse. So it's no wonder that Fabi played rook e8, and then even later went rook d8. And actually, I think this is one of the strong sides of the humans, is that we anticipate sometimes 10, 15 moves ahead what is going to happen. Like, white is not forced to play e5 here, but when we're looking at this position, our main concern with black is that e5 is going to happen. Maybe not in 2 moves, but in 10, 15 moves, definitely. And guess what? Even in the game, e5 happens, and that's how Carlsen won the match.
Right.
Yeah, and in general, what you said is true, quite correct. Is that this goes back to the sort of the 0-0-0 point
Yes.
we made earlier, right? With traditional engines, they have a hard time if, as far as they can tell, with best play, everything ends similarly. They have a hard time picking, which is, again, an advantage of this sort of approach that AlphaZero and Leela use, where it's not just all about, like, okay, well, what happens with absolutely best play? It's like, well, what gives me the most options in case things go a little bit differently? Like, what if I make a suboptimal move, my opponent makes a suboptimal move? And it's then that you start thinking, sort of more like a human, although, sort of with a machine level of precision, where you're like, okay, well, let me put my piece here just in case these other things happen, even if they're not ideal.
Would there be like a value system that would benefit a computer? Because I feel that even this one could be, in statistics, could be a value that, okay, I will value the squares as well and say that if I'm moving my rook to an even more closed file, that's like a minus value, and just plus it up. Or it just takes too many values to...
So, traditional engines like Stockfish already definitely do things like that. Like they sort of penalize pieces for being on worse squares, give them bonuses for being on better squares. The trick is, right, like they're pushing this analysis fairly deep, and they're not caring about like where the piece goes in the middle of the line. They're just looking at, okay, with best play at the end of the line, what does the position look like? And if they all end in the same way after a bunch of shuffling, they don't care what happened in the meantime. And so that's sort of the thing, is like it's not looking at the position after rook f8. It's looking at the position, 20 moves in the future and saying, okay, by 20 moves in the future, it didn't matter that my rook navigated to f8 and then back somewhere else. So they definitely already have bonuses and penalties like this. It's just they don't care about, like, well, what if my rook stays on f8? They're like, well, I'm going to move it away later, so it doesn't matter.
So actually, yeah?
No, go right ahead.
Talking about values, you mentioned one of the games where actually AlphaZero wins a very nice game where actually values plays a very high role. The
AlphaZero with
the
white?
English game. Now, I want to stop here for a second. I noticed many commentators said that, oh, queen b6, whatever, Stockfish made a move. Again, it's something like the rook f8 thing. Here, grandmasters, if anyone would ever dare to suggest queen b6, we would frown and we would point at the door. Because the main concept of white is that I want to play d4 here. I want to open up the position. Now, you can't stop me as black from playing d4, but queen b6 is something that, if we're talking about humans, is naive. It's saying that, oh, you're going to play d4, and then we transpose back to the main line. Oh, not queen d4, but knight takes d4. And then we transpose back. But obviously, white is not going to do any of this. And then queen b6 is just very silly here. This queen is just silly here. So I'm not saying that queen b6 is losing, but even when you analyze games, sometimes grandmasters even say that the last and the first mistake was queen b6, and that was the cause of the downfall. And I feel that it's not fair to point out that this game wasn't even from the get-go. This game was advantageous to AlphaZero, maybe not too advantageous, but advantageous nonetheless with this queen b6 move, as that's in the way. But what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, and this is sort of, again, like going back to that recurring theme that as long as a traditional engine sees that with best play things sort of end up in a similar place, it has a hard time distinguishing among them, and especially if it thinks that there is nothing better than to transpose to some normal line. So this position is a decent example. Like even the current...
Should we bring the board back up?
Okay, just a second.
Even the current Stockfish, while it doesn't play queen b6 here, it sort of does it by accident, right? Like it's not that it sees that queen b6 is somehow worse or substantially worse. It sort of just, it likes something else slightly better, so it avoids it. But if you force queen b6, it still thinks everything's kind of okay. And again, the closest thing that we in the rest of the world have to AlphaZero is Leela. And Leela does get substantially happier with white after queen b6, as to your point, it probably should, because this makes black's job harder. Maybe maybe with perfect play, it's all the same, but it's still, you set yourself a harder task.
So you're kind of saying that maybe queen b6 is not a mistake if you play 5,000 beautiful and precise moves.
Right. Yeah, and that's sort of the risk traditional engines run, and it's what you see in some of the games where they end up losing to AlphaZero, or we also have games where Stockfish or other traditional engines lose to Leela, and this happens a lot where they're playing and they're like, okay, yeah, this is fine, this is fine, this is fine, and they're not necessarily wrong with perfect play. Maybe they do still draw these games, but they've sort of painted themselves into a corner where now they have to play perfectly. And as strong as they are, Stockfish, Komodo, Houdini, these engines are still not playing perfectly. So it still affects them if they paint themselves into a corner where they have to play incredibly precisely.
Kind of going with this percentage chess, that maybe this is still correct in the realm of acceptable, and it's still not something that you should reject totally. But percentage-wise, white is slightly happier.
Right, exactly. Like there's, white gets a little more leeway, black gets a little less leeway. You and I talked a little bit earlier. Like I think a good comparison here is like for a traditional engine, like especially if you're using table bases, right? Like, from the perspective of a table base, there's no difference between defending a drawn king and pawn versus king ending and defending king and rook versus king, rook, and bishop. From a table-based perspective, as long as you start in a drawn version of one of them, they're both just draws. However, in practical play, if you're not a table base, you definitely should have some preference of one over the other. And while it's not quite that black and white, with something like Stockfish versus AlphaZero or Stockfish versus Leela, they run a similar risk where they're like, well, if I play perfectly for the next so long, then it looks like everything's okay. But as good as they are, they're still not playing perfectly. So it does still matter that, they get steered into something that's a little bit harder, and then eventually it's even beyond their capabilities, which are astronomical, but they are followable.
Yeah, so I want to continue with this game a little bit, because this will actually be important if we're still talking about values and how the computers measure things. H4. Clearly AlphaZero is getting ready to push that hairy pawn up there. Bishop d6, h5, queen d8. And now, whenever I was learning chess from older grandmasters, they would point with their old finger at the queen on d8 and says, why did you move your queen to b6 if you 10 moves later move back to d8? What is wrong with you? And obviously that's a bit harsh because sometimes you have to make the best move possible. But it's also a warning sign, and that's why like older grandmasters point this out frequently, is that if you move your piece and then you have to move it back, probably something went wrong. And then here comes the h6 move, and you had something to say about this h6 regarding this match.
Yeah, so this is actually something that people in the Leela community, or people who've been following Leela for a long time, they'll start recognizing and getting pretty giddy about. Leela loves to do this with its pawns, and it turns out AlphaZero as well. There's actually, again, an entire chapter about this in Game Changer by Sadler. So AlphaZero and Leela are very similar. They love to get this cramping pawn on a square like h6, where it restricts the king, sets up potential mating threats. Like even in end games where there's not immediate mating threats, they both, Leela and AlphaZero, really love this formation. They get very excited. Like usually the evaluations become very high, and they're willing to do this even often for the cost of a pawn or two.
Yeah, I remember facing these h4, h5, h6 ideas when I was really young, and I also was as skeptical as Stockfish that, nothing's going to happen, what do you want? And actually my bishop was already fianchettoed, so on this diagonal. And it can get stuck in this corner on h8, and it does nothing for like 15 moves. And obviously I lost that game because that bishop on h8 is just terrible. And what's kind of interesting is that the more experience you get, the more you appreciate like these values. You think that that's just a pawn on h6, but the more experience you get in this game, you realize it's something that should be valued. I remember Kasparov saying that if there's a knight on f5, it's worth a rook, which might be a little bit exaggerated, but usually when you get a knight on f5, this specific square, which obviously is defended now, but if that is not attacked and you have a firm attacking knight on f5, usually you get a huge attack and you might even win material. And I wonder, like, is there some loopholes like that still in computers, like not appreciating that one piece occupies a square and that's just so important?
Yeah, and this particular theme, this is actually a good example of precisely that. In many of the Leela Stockfish games that we've seen in Chess.com's Computer Chess Championship and in TCEC, this sort of thing, this thorn pawn, as people have liked to start calling it, this has been a common theme in games where Stockfish has sort of struggled. And so the Stockfish team has actually already introduced a patch where they give this sort of pawn a fairly high bonus, and this has actually made Stockfish a little better. Yeah. So there's already these sorts of improvements that have been sort of revealed by playing against new types of engines like AlphaZero and Leela.
Now, Jacob, you said Stockfish released a patch. One of the ideas behind AlphaZero is it should not need a patch the way that it learns. Is that right?
I mean, you can, at a very, very high level, you can sort of view it as like self-patching in a way. The trick, though, is that you can't easily direct it. Like, in this case with Stockfish, they were like, this is a pattern that Stockfish undervalues. Let's, introduce some code to sort of fix that. With something like Leela or AlphaZero, there's no such explicit guidance in what it learns. It plays itself, and it's kind of a black box what it's learning, what it's learning to represent and value. You just have to hope it keeps getting better.
Any further points to make on this particular game, Boros?
I'm just showing the last moment of the game where Stockfish gave up. And you can see that h6 pawn, both the h6 pawn and the f6 pawn are like a fang holding the black king captive. And there's no way to stop that c-pawn from marching in and queening. This was a very nice game, although, as Jacob said, big trouble started with 3-4 inaccuracies by black. One of them is bringing the queen out way too early, then going back. That's actually losing a lot of time. Then losing a bit of the bishop pair, but Fischer would be going crazy here. And also allowing this h4, h5, h6 idea, and this was just too much. Now I went through the end part, but it was very interesting also to see that there's been a lot of dilly-dallying with the pieces. Is that because it's a closed position, or sometimes they just feel that I don't need to do anything special, it's just equally good, so I just play it?
Yeah, this is sort of a well-known thing, especially in these closed positions with traditional engines, especially if they think their position's good. Like if they think their position's good for some static reason, then they'll just move around and avoid rocking the boat, right? Like they're just like, oh, I like the way my position looks, I'm going to keep it there. And so you'll see a decent number of high-level computer games where one engine thinks this, and they'll just move around for 35, 40 moves, and then they're like, if I keep my position looking pretty like this, there's a 50-move draw. And then so they'll make some concession, like they'll push a pawn or trade some pieces, and then repeat. So yeah, this is not unusual for high-level computer chess.
All right, well, thank you very much for that, that demo right there. Jacob, Will Page in our chat has asked, what are DeepMind's intentions? Specifically, is AlphaZero continuing to be developed and improved?
So, not surprisingly, the boring answer to that is, unfortunately for me, I don't work for DeepMind, so I can't really say for sure. However, the indications that we've gotten from some of the communication that we've seen, like one of the guys on the team has actually generously answered questions on one of the big computer chess forums. It seems like they are probably continuing to do some work with it, but this is far from certain. We don't really know, but I suspect they're probably still putting some time into it.
Boros, let's say that AlphaZero eventually gets released to the public. The layman can get his hands on AlphaZero. I think that AlphaZero has built up such a mystique right now, based on what people don't know for sure, that if it was ever released, people would look at this as it's like the god of chess, right? And my question for you is there any way that this could hurt chess as far as humans play it? Is there anything to be afraid of with AlphaZero?
Actually, I have kind of an example of how computer chess hurts your game.
Oh no.
So getting into a little bit of weaknesses, and this time especially human weaknesses. So recently, as many of you know, in the Tata Steel tournament, Shankland resigned a drawn position. Now obviously that sadly sometimes happen, but I think there's something related to using computers too much. So he knew a technical position at the end when he resigned, that he needs to corner his king. And computers, like traditional computers that we use, usually give you one line which is drawish and doesn't give you many options of draws. So you're looking for the one specific solution. So when Shankland decided, oh, I can't put my king in the corner, therefore I must be lost. And that's probably a reason he resigned, because he didn't believe anymore that he's going to hold the position. And it turns out, if he would have believed that there's more than one solution to the position, probably he would have found a draw, as he didn't need to put his king right in the corner, but could have kept it closer to the queen side.
Well, gentlemen, it's been a fun hour so far, and we are nearing the end, unfortunately, but I'd like to give both of you an opportunity to give your final points. Jacob, you go first. What's your take overall on AlphaZero? Is it here to stay?
Yeah, I mean, put that way, I think the only answer really can be yes. The techniques used by DeepMind and AlphaZero have been very successfully, even with a little bit of information that was revealed, it's been very successfully reproduced by the Leela team, who was already performing at a very high level. and influencing things like analysis. So I'd say the simple answer is clearly yes.
All right. Boros, what's your final take on AlphaZero and what we've talked about this hour?
Well, it was very eye-opening to talk with Jacob because I use the computer, we all need to use the computer to understand the game better. I appreciate AlphaZero more now, especially that there's more and more papers released. I think that part of it, especially I think Leela will stay. What I feel is that AlphaZero will look for even more grounds to conquer. That's what I see right now.
Well, one thing is for certain, even though we are humans, we use computers, and I think everyone can agree that human play is changed. It is significantly altered. We learn from computers, and it's an exciting time to be around the game of chess. I want to tell all of you about some big upcoming events here presented by the St. Louis Chess Club. As you know, the Cairns Cup, the first annual Cairns Cup, is just a couple of weeks away. Round 1 is February 6th. We're going to have 10 of some of the best female players in the world. For the first time here in St. Louis, they're going to be playing in a round-robin event in the style of the Sinkfield Cup. So we are going to have English commentary. We will have Russian commentary right here in Studio B here at the St. Louis Chess Club. Also, you can watch that at uschesschamps.com. Just yesterday, the format for the 2019 Grand Chess Tour was announced, and it is the biggest one ever. While there was a press release that went out 1 month ago, this time we know specifically what will happen. The St. Louis Rapid and Blitz, it's happening. We're also going to be adding the Côte d'Ivoire Rapid and Blitz Invitational and another classical event in Croatia. So that's going to be just like the Sinkfield Cup. This is going to be an amazing year for chess, guys, and it all begins in May on the Ivory Coast. For more information on that, grandchesstour.org. The information will be up there shortly, and right now you can visit Grand Chess Tour on Facebook for the press release and the official schedule. So that's going to do it for this hour here in Studio B. We've had a great conversation about AlphaZero. This event was directed by the world's greatest B team. Right now, he's his own one-man show. Danny Machuca is your technical director. Thanks for joining us. Jacob, it's been great talking with you, sir. Boros, good talking with you. Grandmaster Dénes Boros and Jacob Wilkins. I'm Ben Simon. Until next time, for the Cairns Cup, we say so long from the Show Me State.
Yeah.